This week, Putin's next move. His party swept parliamentary elections. Now he can write his ticket to the future. But where does Vladimir Putin want to take Russia? We hear from two veteran correspondents. And putting Putin in context, Khrushchev and his era. Historian Bill Taubman on the man who tried to humanize the Soviet system.
They talked about what Stalin had done, and Khrushchev said, I have no use for this man, and when I get a chance, I'll settle with this guy.
A feature interview. Hello, I'm Brian Stewart. Welcome to Our World. This week, we look first at Russia's Vladimir Putin and where he's taking his powerful, contradictory, and often unknowable country. This past week, Russia held parliamentary elections. President Vladimir Putin's party, United Russia, won easily more than 60% of the votes, despite allegations by European observers of irregularities. This victory is important because Putin, by law, has to step down from power in May after serving 2 terms. His future is unclear, and so his party's majority now gives him lots of new options. But the West is now looking at Russia with increasing alarm, unsure how to interpret Putin and his ambitions. That's why we turn to 2 Russia hands here at the CBC, Don Murray, based in London, and Alexandra Shatska. Don Murray brings valuable perspectives to the question of Putin, having reported from Russia during the exciting years of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Alexandra Shatska is the CBC's new reporter in Moscow. She brings to her assignment an exciting history. She lived in communist Poland as a child. Her grandfather was sent to Stalin's Gulag in the 1930s, and her father went to university in provincial Russia during the Khrushchev years. She has seen the spectrum of Soviet history within her own family. We present first a short excerpt from her report earlier this week on the Putin victory, and then hear her thoughts on what's ahead for Russia.
The international observers here express their concerns about the state of the democracy in Russia.
Our central conclusion is that these elections failed to meet many of the commitments and standards that we have in the OSCE and the Council of Europe. And by that, it is not, as we say, not a fair election.
But for Vladimir Putin, it's not the case.
Легитимность российского парламента.
The legitimacy of the Russian parliament has grown without a doubt, he said. With its 4 parties, the current Duma is supported by 90% of voters. But Putin's future was also at stake. His second and final presidential term ends in May. What is he going to do next? Not many analysts now believe he will change the constitution to seek a 3rd presidential term. So, a total new position?
Putin из большой политики не уходит.
Putin does not intend to leave the big-time politics, he says. This analyst close to the Kremlin believes that United Russia, which owes its victory to Putin, will pay him back, appointing a presidential candidate willing to create a post which will suit him perfectly. You know, here every day there is a new scenario about Putin's future popping up. But so far, it's more or less clear that Putin is here to stay. In which capacity, we don't know yet. I personally think that Putin likes power. He wants to stay. He has a sense of a mission to make this country great again, to make this country again a superpower. And he has been very lucky because, you know, oil, for example, right now is at $100 a barrel. It was less than $25 a barrel when he took power. So the country is rich, has a lot of money, so he has this possibility to make this country great again.
I think the idea that Putin is some sort of a corrective, a strong leader to replace what came before in the 90s is a bit of a false premise. Boris Yeltsin actually was a strong leader, and Mikhail Gorbachev before him was a man who wanted to be a strong leader, and the key is that both of these men used the trappings of democratic institutions to try and reinforce their efforts to control power. Gorbachev, in fact, set up parliamentary democracy on a limited basis with open elections, two-candidate elections, not so much because he was a great Democrat, but because he saw a new Congress, a new parliament as a power base, a separate power base, which he would become the president of, to fight off the forces of conservatism in the Communist Party and in the KGB. In reaction, the KGB, the military, the conservatives, and the Communist Party organized a coup against him in 1991, and he was saved by Yeltsin, his adversary, and he was perfectly happy with the trappings of democracy, a parliament in Russia, until such time as it stood up to him, at which point he literally barricaded the MPs in 1993. When they broke out, he sent in the tanks and blasted away the parliament, and it was clear from then on in that this was largely a window dressing on what amounted to a Kremlin autocracy. Yeltsin was an autocrat, a sleeping, drunken autocrat, who, when he was sleeping, tolerated criticism, open debate on television, and that sort of behavior. When he awoke, everybody had to come to heel. This was the man, after all, who unleashed not one but two wars in Chechnya. And this was the man who did not hesitate to bring national television completely under his control, only temporarily, but at a key time in 1996 to win re-election. So all of this suggests a different, if you will, scenario. I would refer you to a key sentence that, a verdict that Gorbachev passed on himself in 1993 after he'd been turfed out of power, after his country had been broken. And he said, not that he was a Democrat, he said, and I quote, "I wanted democratization in a one-party state." And from that comment and from Gorbachev, I think you can draw a direct line through Yeltsin right to Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin is among the last generation of Russian leaders raised under the Soviet regime. He experienced firsthand the communist system, and his worldview was shaped partly by having lived in a country closed off from the rest of the world, in which saw the West as an enemy. As a leader who often cites history, he has looked at Russia's recent past, at the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin, and has decided they made mistakes. We know he's an advocate of a strong nationalist Russia and wants to revive its international influence. Now, every leader brings his own stamp to his era and can shape history by the force of his personality. That's what historian Bill Taubman believes. He won a Pulitzer Prize a couple of years ago for his insightful portrait of Nikita Khrushchev, who ran the Soviet Union in the 1960s when Putin was a child. Khrushchev is interesting because he represents a reformist strain in Russia. His greatest achievement was denouncing Russia's authoritarian past and trying to put a human face on communism.